Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 14th of March 2024. Massive thanks to all of you members and people who watch my videos on a daily basis. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks for putting in a good word on Professor Gertis Explains latest, or one of his latest videos about which YouTubers to watch. Many of you put in a good shout for me, and I really do appreciate that. Thank you for that. Right, let's go to... I do hope to be a kind of one-stop shop for everyone to get all of your news, and that's why there's so much content coming out, because there's so much news. Right, we'll go to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them in the video description below. So 970 personnel lost is a large number. Again, every day is high, every day we see reported very high numbers of personnel losses for the Russians. Really difficult for them, surely, if they're losing anywhere near these numbers. 5 tanks, not as high as we have seen. 17 APVs and 11 artillery systems is low, all things considered, compared to where those numbers have been, but still significant losses. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, 27 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 9 pieces of special equipment. So definitely not the highest day of losses, and could signify that the Russians themselves are pulling back from committing to too many frontline assaults, particularly in the east. So I think, as I say all the time, stats tell their own stories, and the story here is that I wonder if the story is that the Russians are cooling down on their offensive activities. Okay, when we look at the Russian losses and Ukrainian losses as compiled by Andrew Perpetua by surveying the socials on a daily basis, the last 24 hours has been particularly tough again for the Russians. We have about a 4-to-1 loss ratio statistic there. Let's see if the Ukrainians, however, have some pretty high losses in terms of the value of what they have lost. And actually, you can see there are 2 destroyed and 1 damaged helicopters here. I'll talk about that in a minute. Almost did an entire breaking news update about this strike. The Russians have caused some right old problems for the Ukrainians over the last week or two. They really have had some incredible successes in taking out high value bits of kit. We've seen Patriot launchers almost certainly taken out, maybe other parts of that battery. We've seen S-300s be hit regularly, although I don't know whether they were video dumps referring to a much longer time period. However, they've still been hit or destroyed. We have seen high value radar systems hit, here 3 helicopters, so on and so forth. It's been pretty painful for the Ukrainians, and I think this goes to show that they have not successfully dealt with long-range reconnaissance from drones that can get behind the Ukrainian lines and acquire targets. The ISTAR, the intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition and reconnaissance of the Russians is still prevailing. And so we are seeing these high-value losses. 2 helicopters destroyed by cluster warhead, 1 damaged but did fly away. And then we also have 2 engineering vehicles taken out, a couple of bits of artillery, and a range of tanks there. Quite a high number of tanks for the Ukrainians to lose in a single day. There's 6 tanks, T-64s mainly, a couple of T-72s, and then we have a quad, pickup, and whatnot. Okay, for the Russians, we have a lot of equipment, but obviously they're competing really with 3 helicopters being, or 2 helicopters particularly being lost. We have 4 bits of surveillance and comms equipment, a recovery vehicle themselves, a couple of BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket systems that will hurt a little bit, and range of artillery there, mainly damaged. Some tanks thrown into the mix, and I have another video of another T-90, but that's not on the list at the moment. T-80s, T-72s and whatnot. Then a range of infantry fighting vehicles of all sorts there, to be honest. Some APCs and so on and so forth. Trucks, golf carts, civilian vehicles and whatnot. Okay, so the Russian have lost a huge mass of equipment. That will add up, and that will be very high value compared to the Ukrainian losses outside of the helicopters. So if you're discounting the helicopters, then that's a bad day for the Russians. But if you're including the helicopters, which of course you should, then actually Ukraine has had a challenging day, losing some really high value bits of kit. Now, obviously, I can't show you the videos because I get in trouble. So all I'll say is that they are worth looking at. Here we have, oh, for goodness sake, why does that not pause there? It paused eventually. No, it didn't. Oh, this is Twitter. Twitter, sort yourself out. Look. Okay, there you go. Right. So we have 3 helicopters. These 2 on the right-hand side were taken out by the cluster munitions. That one was damaged, but there is a guy that is running. One of the pilots ran and got to the helicopter to get in it and take off. The rotors are actually, the blades are rotating there, I do believe. So they are, this is like a forward operating base or somewhere where they are landing helicopters to, I don't know, get some more rockets on board or something. And then they were hit with cluster munitions. So this is a real challenge for the Ukrainians. Someone needs to scream at idiots running things in Kiev. They can't afford to lose valuable assets left and right due to using them carelessly like they are Russia. Now, I would think that's a little bit harsh from Jakub Janovsky. I would say it's about, are they using them carelessly, or are Russia just really good at being able to get their reconnaissance drones through? And given that they are getting their reconnaissance drones right but deep behind Ukrainian lines, should Ukraine stop doing everything? You know, how do you deal with this? 2 Ukrainian Mi-8 transport helicopters were destroyed, and 1 being damaged but being able to fly away by both cluster munition and precise strikes in an unknown location. So Andrew says that actually 2 of them were Mi-17V5s, and the other one was a Mi-8 that escaped, but I can't talk to the details there. And then we have 2 of them. After 2 years, Russia has deployed drones with vastly improved optics that fly higher and further, and they've improved their reaction time from target identification to strike. So what we have seen over the last couple of weeks is Russia's improved hits on time-sensitive targets. Here were helicopters whose rotor blades were still rotating that were hit by Russian, or maybe they'd stopped by the time the missiles hit. I don't know. I can't remember. But these are time-sensitive targets, right? So Russia is showing themselves very capable of being able to take out time-sensitive targets in a way that they weren't a year and a half ago. They were fling in ballistic missiles at buildings and whatnot, but things that can move, especially if they were a long way behind the front line, they were less able to hit. Now that seems to change. So there is definitely some adaptation from the Russians here. Thomas Steiner says very bad, especially if Ukrainian troops keep hanging around in strike distance. So, well, what should Ukraine do to counter this? Not stop for more than 5 minutes within 60 to 70 kilometers of the front, says Thomas Steiner. Yeah, and as someone else says, well, I get your point. That is probably easier said than done. This is always my approach, which is, yeah, okay, but the reality of war and the reality of the situation is you can't just stop for 5 minutes if you need to do something that takes an hour, right? And at some point, a helicopter's got to land somewhere near there to do X, Y, and Z, right? So I think the only solution would be the development of autonomous drones to hunt enemy drones. Missiles are too expensive, and gun systems just means you have to put an optic that is good enough to stay out of range. So yeah, jammers would be useless too if AI is used. So there are challenges here, and I'm sure the Ukraine is going to be working hard on overcoming those challenges, but it is costing the Ukrainians an awful lot at the moment. This has not been a good week for the Ukrainians, that's for sure. In certain aspects, in other aspects, those long-range drone attacks on Russia have been absolutely phenomenal. But otherwise, it has been very challenging. So so actually, looking at that, the rotor blades were rotating at the beginning, then it cuts to when they're stopped. So obviously these were spotted. Then you have enough time for that drone to stay in the air. Here's the challenge: is that those rotor blades stop, the drone has acquired the target, gets onto the missile operators. The missile's sent up and hits these, and all the while the drone is still there. The drone is still spotting this. Now this looks like long-range drone reconnaissance. So as in the drone has gone a long way, but is also looking at this from quite a long distance itself. This isn't a drone that's just sitting right above like some first-person view drone. This is, you know, the angle here and the resolution on the imagery would indicate that this is sort of like your Bayraktar drone. It's not a Bayraktar, it'll be something like an Orlan, but from it's taking this imagery from a long way away. However, it's still able to do that, you know, over the entire time it takes to locate, acquire, and destroy the targets. Now, there is a person just there. You can see all these cluster rounds slamming down that destroy these two helicopters to the right. But there's a chap here that is running, and you know there must have been shrapnel from cluster munitions flying all over the shop. And he gets into that helicopter and he takes off. And so before another missile is able to come down and hit, he's out of there. And so that is impressive. This hero pilot that ran back into that helicopter and saved it deserves a medal. 2 destroyed, 1 saved. There are also losses in personnel. There's an increase in accurate strikes behind our lines by the enemy over the past few months, and the situation is rather serious. That is indeed correct. Now, it didn't stop there. Unfortunately, all these videos seem to be getting screwed up, but it didn't stop there because there was a continuation of the attacks. Let's see if we can show you. Yeah, so there are these warehouses here. So what the reconnaissance also did is track the supply to those helicopters and then hit where the supplies were taken from. So continuation of the attack on the Ukrainian helicopters. Su-34 flew in and destroyed the missile warehouse of the airfield along with personnel. The Armed Forces of Ukraine rescued the remaining aircraft missiles from the Mi-17 helicopters, which were destroyed by the missile attack, and transported them in trucks to Novopavlovka. Russia surveyed and monitored the process. Ukrainians hid helicopter missiles in a truck in one of the hangars not far from the affected helicopter landing area, about 900 meters, after which the Su-34 arrived and destroyed the hangar with FAB and UMPC glide kits. So using glide bombs to destroy the hangars where the Ukrainians had been storing the missiles, hiding the missiles that they'd saved from the helicopter. So it's just a bit of a double whammy there. Not good for the Ukrainians. Right, John Ridge then, who's a bit of an expert on all things kind of missiles and whatnot. Much of the improvement in Russian ISTAR, so intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition and reconnaissance capabilities, is derived from fielding both an increase in quantity and quality of aerial drones. This has enabled them to generate fires with greater consistency and responsiveness across a greater length and depth of the front. So, and this is in reply to Fabian Hoffman saying this is a third instance of successful Russian dynamic targeting against mobile targets within a short time frame. Ukraine must urgently adapt to these new vulnerabilities. John Ridge continues, Congress must enact the supplemental and provide the appropriations to place orders for any of the diversity of CUAS, so counter drone or SHORAD. So that CUAS means counter unmanned aerial drones, basically. And SHORAD means short-range air defense solutions offered by industry. In other words, part of that package, $60 billion plus package that's caught up in Congress. A, it must be released, and B, it needs to include something that would be able to deal with these issues. Europe must likewise look to leverage what the US can immediately produce as well as what they can develop domestically. Absolutely. So this is, a lot of people are freaking out at the moment at some of the losses the Ukrainians have made. Andrew Perpetua is one of them. People trying to downplay Russia's improved ISR capabilities, remember, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, are missing the boat. Just because something existed for a long time doesn't mean it isn't improved, for goodness sake. Especially an issue where improvement is fixing communication friction. Do people really think that something cannot be addressed? Cutting down time from observation to engagement is like normal. Really, the problem here is that Ukraine had all of this time to develop systems to deal with drones while they were hindered by systemic communication problems. But since that was never done, we are seeing the impact of those systemic problems being alleviated. How many times did we see footage of drones spotting high-value targets and then the Russians strike being like the next day when the object had moved already? Then they edited the video to make it look like a kill. Well, now that strike is 30 minutes later. In other words, at the beginning of the war, you saw all-land drones spotting these targets, but either faking destroying them or sending in lancets that kind of bounce off the side or miss, or whatever. It didn't work because they were time sensitive, targets are moved, etc., etc., etc. But now that's not the case, and because Ukraine didn't do anything to solve that problem then, because it wasn't really producing the losses, that allowed Russia to adapt and improve on their target acquisition and their destruction of the target. And actually, Ukraine doesn't have an answer to that at the moment. I mean, it has to be something like somehow acquiring drones as targets as soon as they cross that front line. They need better protection against these cheap reconnaissance drones from the Russians that have long been effective. Right from the beginning of the war, I said this. You can go back and look at my older videos. The Russians have used things like Orlan 10 and Orlan 30s really effectively. They've got the distance on them. They're cheap. They're quite difficult to shoot down, all things considered. I mean, you end up having to use expensive missiles and whatnot. So it's a challenge that still hasn't been solved. Right, moving on to look at other losses. Staying on helicopters, there has been a helicopter with shift workers, gold miners, I believe, 20 people on board, although there's claims that only one or possibly two the pilots are dead, but it could all be dead. So that's a Mi-8 helicopter in Russia, not necessarily to do with the war, but it is being mentioned quite a bit. And then things inside Russia's border remain unclear, particularly in Belgorod. The Siberian Battalion posted this video claiming it to be a destroyed infantry fighting vehicle near the village of Gukovsky, as I mentioned in my frontline update last night. So there are pieces of equipment that have supposedly been taken out by the pro-Ukrainian Russians north of the border. A Russian BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system is another one that's been destroyed north of the border by first-person view drones near Kazinka checkpoint, one of the places where these units have been attacking. And then this is now back into Ukraine, some footage of 3 Russian BTRs and 35 soldiers being destroyed by the Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade with first-person view drones and US-supplied Bradley. That footage of the Bradley taking out with its Bushmaster gun, the BTR, is doing the rounds at the moment. It absolutely had to happen, didn't it? Had to happen. I was playing with fire then. The Bushmaster takes out this BMP, and that's fairly visual bit of footage there that's worth looking at. T-90 also destroyed by the 92nd Assault Brigade. Really frustrating videos. All of the browser windows have gone funky. T-90 destroyed by 92nd Brigade. That's not on the loss list at the moment, or at least not on Andrews. It might turn up tomorrow. That's, of course, the best tank that the Russians generally have. Okay, moving on to distance strikes. And Tim White says Ukraine's air defences weren't as successful in the night that's just passed. 36 drones were sent into Ukraine. Only 22 were shot down. So that's looking like an interception rate of probably around 60%, something like that, which is much lower than it has been and much lower than it really needs to be. That means their 14 drones would have found their targets or near their targets, and the rest will have probably fallen and caused damage anyway. So that's a challenging night for the Ukrainians. I don't know what has been here and where, but they've also sent in S-300s from Belgorod into Kharkiv, and that is a continual problem. Kharkiv just gets routinely hammered And the Ukrainians, it would be great if they could take out those missile systems that are doing that. That would be top of one of the targets at the top of my list of desires. Right, okay. Moving on. So not too much detail on that yet, but pretty heavy night for the Ukrainians. Now, Russian authorities claim that they shot down 14 drones last night, 11 of them over Belgorod, 3 over Kursk. They routinely claim that they shoot down every single Ukrainian drone, and then we see footage to show that's demonstrably untrue. So I presume, just on the form of that horse that's racing, it ain't going to win. So it's just probably not true. So meanwhile, right now, Belgorod media write about missile attack that's hitting a regional centre. There's lots of footage coming out of hits, drones hitting, and other things hitting in Belgorod. It's pretty hot there at the moment. Ukrainian General Staff reported that 36 drones, as mentioned, were sent into Ukraine, 22 shot down. Second air alarm this morning sounds in Kyiv and many other Ukrainian regions. So that's obviously still taking place. Now, Belgorod, as mentioned, is pretty hot. There are various explosions and air raid warnings and whatnot. Now, outside of Belgorod and Kursk, we also have Sochi Airport in the south, near the Black Sea, that there is something burning there. And not sure sort of what has happened. Nonetheless, something is burning in Sochi Airport. Looks like it's an airplane, says Anton Gerashchenko. Others say it's a burning, in this case, this is Sarin saying it's a burning Mi-8 helicopter. I don't know what it is, but something's burning at Sochi Airport. Looks like it's a plane, is a quote here from one source. On March the 13th, residents of Sochi got a fire in the local airport on video. Emergency services and the airport claimed, though, quote, the fire was planned. It's training. Of course they're doing some fire training in the middle of a runway on an airport or wherever it is. Right. 10 more invaders were killed as Ukraine fired missiles at a military training ground in occupied Luhansk. I believe 3 missiles were shot at this. While I cannot verify this, says Tim White, the news is reported by a reliable Russian but anti-Putin Astra channel. There's a number of different sources claiming that over 10 have been killed, or 10 servicemen have been killed in that strike. And then we're going to look at the strikes on the Russian oil refineries over the last couple of days. So Ukrainian drone attacks over the past 2 days have paralysed 3 Russian refineries, which account for 12% of refining capacity in Russia. And indeed, Russian fuel prices, so petrol prices, have gone up almost 2% over the last 24 hours, 1.88%, I believe, which is a reflection of the strikes taking place here. So the largest oil refineries have halted operations or reduced output. This is reported by Bloomberg. It's going to be possibly hitting the Russian economy a little bit. It looks like the Ryazan, says Anton Gerashchenko, oil refinery will probably be out of order for weeks, at least, and the largest oil distillation unit in Lukoil's oil refinery in Nizhny Novgorod region was shut down after a fire due to a drone strike yesterday, and we'll return to Lukoil in a second. Several technological complexes for processing oil into straight-run gasoline were seriously damaged at the Ryazan oil refinery, according to Russian Telegram channels. Destruction of Russian oil infrastructure will continue. 2 things are already clear, he says. Sowing in Russia will be very difficult, which means food prices are likely to start growing drastically in the middle of the summer. Lines to get gas within Russia and gas prices will probably grow in a few weeks already. Increase in gas prices will lead to prices of everything growing in Russia. Lukoil Nizhgorodneft Dorgzintsnez is not just on one of many oil refineries. It is the largest refinery of a gasoline oil profile in the Russian Federation. In early January, Lukoil reported problems at the Nizhny Novgorod oil refinery. One of the 2 existing gasoline production units was shut down. The reason was attributed to the breakdown of the compressor equipment purchased abroad. Obviously, sanctions are going to be hurting here. It was impossible to supply components for it due to sanctions. Then Lukoil even asked other producers to help with the supply of up to 200,000 tons of AI-95 gasoline in January and February, although the Ministry of Energy of the Russian Federation officially persisted and stated that it would not affect the market. A month later, it began to prepare restrictions on gasoline exports in Russia. Today, drones could have finished off the second, newer and last unit. This could stop or significantly limit the production of gasoline, which has already been a problem at the plant due to equipment failure. And systematic, sustained and continuous strikes will continue to finish off gasoline production. In 2023, the refinery averaged 410,000 units of tons of gasoline per month, up to 4.5 million tons per year. The same goes for diesel. Total gasoline production in all of Russia up to 43 million tons. Not just one of the many refineries in question, but at least 10% of Russia's total gasoline production. In the context of regional consumption, the deficit could be much larger. The specificity of oil refineries is that they were placed in areas of consumption, as it is much more convenient to transport crude oil by pipeline than products from it. The main consumers of the refinery were Moscow and the Moscow region, where gasoline was delivered by pipeline, and the production region itself. But even in case of replacement of supplies, such fuel will be much more expensive because it will include logistic costs. This will result in a new and already more significant rise in fuel prices. Despite this strategic importance of the refinery, no decent protection against drones was organised. This allowed to finish off the refinery, the Ukrainians to finish it off. Local agricultural producers may be next. Rising prices and falling production on the eve of the sowing season may become a serious problem for the Russian agricultural sector. That's pretty significant there. As you can see from the capacity of that one in Ryazan is one of the biggest ones, second only to the Gazprom one in Omsk by the looks of it. So that is a real challenge for the Russians. Right, now we're going on to other bits and pieces, and we will return to Lukoil in a little while. So anti-Kremlin militia says fighting is ongoing in 5 Russian settlements. So this is as a result of the pro-Ukrainian Russian units, 3 different units, Siberian Battalion, the Russian Volunteer Corps, and the Freedom of Russia Legion, attacking in a number of places again today. Russian media reports heavy fighting between Russian separatists and Russian soldiers at the moment on the border of Belgorod region, with Russian separatists using Bradleys, tanks and other fighting vehicles. Well, that's coming from the Russians. I wouldn't necessarily say that's 100% true, but it could be. Situation in the Russian regions bordering Ukraine is escalating, says Nexta. The governor of Kursk region has said that, quote, Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups are not abandoning their attempts to enter the territory of the region. A missile alert has been declared in Belgorod, the mayor's office said. Explosions are heard in the city. The Kremlin media reported that Russian military is, quote, fighting with the Ukrainians, AFU, on the border of Belgorod region. So they're talking about fighting the Ukrainians as opposed to fighting pro-Ukrainian Russian separatists. The Freedom of Russia Legion published a message urging residents of Kursk and Bryansk regions to immediately go to shelters. So it is all still happening there. Russian channels report renewed incursion attempts near Rizivka Tetkino. So Tetkino is this village or town that these pro-Ukrainian Russians are supposed to have taken control of. It might have just been a raid, I'm not really sure. But it's a useful position, geographically speaking, as I talked about yesterday, as well as Bobilivka, Iskra, another place. All events will be covered by No Reports today. So, yeah, there's footage still coming out. Soldiers on their operations there. The task is to liberate Russia from Putin, Alex Baranovsky, representative of the Freedom of Russia region, has said. According to him, the elections started with a bang. And fighting continues on the outskirts of the village of Tetkino. The situation is tense in Kursk and Belgorod regions. He also noted that the ultimate goal is to march to Moscow. Okay, so it's fairly grandiose claims there. Now, as PS01 here says, very alarming, bomb threats from Moscow. They're not joking. So there are also elements of these groups or connected to these groups or unconnected, not really sure, but there are threats on Moscow. We will not get tired of repeating. The election commissions of different cities of the country are our legitimate target. Our agents are everywhere, and they're motivated and ready to take revenge for Navalny's murder. So connected to Navalny there, and that was posted on a channel created in February 2024, so fairly recent there. Don't really know the provenance, But possibly linked to that, in St. Petersburg, the FSB have arrested members of the RDK, so Russia Defense Corps, or Volunteer Corps, who were preparing to send poisoned products to the Russian army. Quote, the FSB uncovered and suppressed the illegal activities on the territory of St. Petersburg of a secret cell of the Ukrainian paramilitary organization Russian Volunteer Corps, recognized as terrorists in the Russian Federation, acting in the interest of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. The group included 4 residents of the city, adherents of right-wing radical ideology who, on instructions from curators from the RDK and Ukrainian military intelligence, intended to poison food products intended to be sent as humanitarian aid to military personnel of the Russian armed forces located in the zone of special military operation with a highly toxic chemical and residents of the new territories of Russia. At the same time, the detainees conducted reconnaissance of life support facilities, transport and other critical infrastructure located in St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region for the subsequent preparation of the terrorist strikes. I mean, this is just reading like pure propaganda from the Russians. I mean, it may be that they have arrested people, but it's like that we've arrested these right-wing extremists who are going to poison humanitarian efforts. That's how I'd read this. Members of the terrorist group have been detained. The investigative service of the FSB Directorate for St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region initiated criminal cases. Blah, 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 blah. Provides 10 to 20 years in prison. Okay, so may or may not happen. As someone said, I won't believe it until I see the Sims games, which is a brilliant reference. I wrote an article on that way back and did a few segments on the fact that when they had supposed Nazi operatives operating in Russia that they arrested, on the bed was like a new out of the packet Nazi t-shirt with a crease still in it, and then 3 games of Sims. And of course, what had happened is the Russians had said, right, we're going to set up a false flag operation thing. We're going to pretend we've arrested some Ukrainian Nazis. We need 3 Sims. We need a Nazi t-shirt, blah, blah, blah. So whoever's gone out and bought this stuff has bought a brand new book and then put a signature in it. And it said, the signature, and on the list, it must have said something like, put the signature as name unknown, meaning put an unknown name there. And the person wrote in it, blah, 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 name unknown, right? So it's just really, really shoddy. And then this brand new t-shirt, and then Nazi badges and pictures just placed really weirdly, as if like if you're doing an undercover operation, you're like, I know what we're going to need when we do that operation in Moscow. Yeah, we need to be blending in, right? Yeah. So we need a brand new swastika t-shirt, and we need pictures of Hitler, because I never do a mission without pictures of Hitler, and we need some badges. I want a patch that indicates really who I am as some kind of neo-Nazi activist, and I'm going to just place that against my speaker in a room. And so it goes on. But what they also asked for were, I presume, 3 SIM cards, right, to show that they've got burner phones and SIM cards. And whoever went out and bought all this stuff for the FSB bought 3 games of Sims, and then like 3 PC games of Sims, and then put these all on a bed like a Nazi t-shirt Sims. And then this went viral because the FSB have made such a cock up in staging this that the news organisations later blurred out the 3 Sims games. It was just hilarious. Just really, really bad. And this reminds me of pretty much the same. I did my breaking news piece, one of them yesterday, on Gerasimov, because it appears that he has been replaced. But we haven't seen him for almost 3 months, and he's in charge of the war effort. And also, at the time that a strike happened in Crimea, the claim immediately was he had been killed or taken out in the strike, and he disappeared from then. And I should have said, as soon as Sokolov, the Russian admiral who was supposedly killed in a strike on the Sevastopol naval headquarters, he's just been replaced, and he's not been seen for even longer, right? Is it since September last year? And you're like, the leader of the Black Sea Fleet appears to be not around. Anyway, he's just been fired. And I should have said at the time, mark my words, this will happen to Gerasimov. Like, he's not been found. Guarantee he'll be replaced at some point soon. I should have said, I meant to say that. Guaranteed it will be replaced some point soon. And what's happened? Literally within a week of Sokolov being replaced, Gerasimov's been replaced. No, we have not heard hide nor hair of him. And we can only assume, I think, reasonably, that he is dead or so severely injured that he cannot fulfill his duties. So this is, and when I did that breaking news, my goodness, the trolls came out. They love a bit of trolling on stuff like this because they have to try and control the narrative. The narrative is, if you believe this guy has been missing for 3 months, has just been relieved of his duties because he's not very good, then fair enough, you can believe that. And people have been saying that in my threads, like, no, honestly, mate, I'm justified in my beliefs. You have the burden of proof is on you that that is not the most reasonable assumption of what has happened. Okay. And, because this is what Russia is like, Lukoil reported the sudden death of Vitaly Robertus, who's only 53. 53-year-old VP of the company. Lukoil's once strived for independence, partnering with Western entities and operating internationally. However, Putin has recently tightened control, possibly eyeing a merger with Rosneft. Perhaps before his death, Vitaly, Lukoil's vice president, urged Putin to halt the war before all oil refineries are ablaze. Robertus' death marks a fourth among Lukoil's top managers in the last 2 years. It strikes me as something of a risky job. In October 2023, Vladimir Nakrasov, chairman of the board of directors, passed away due to an acute heart failure. He had assumed leadership after the death of the previous chairman, Ravil Maganov, who fell out of the window at Moscow Central Clinical Hospital in 2022. I shouldn't be laughing about this. This is the murder of people, right? But I'm just laughing at the abstract notion of Russia actually thinking people believe that another person can fall out of a window, or that someone dying from acute heart failure isn't somehow nefarious. In May 2022, Lukoil's former top manager, Alexander Subotin, died of acute heart failure. Again, what's a chance? 2 top Lukoil managers dying of acute heart failures. His body was discovered in a private residence only in Russia. And now we've got your man, Vitaly Robertus, who has died. So what happened? He's vice president of the company. His death is a fourth in a list of managers who have died in October. Oh no, we don't have it. I'm sure he has been. Here it is. So the breaking news now is that he committed suicide at his workplace. He was found hung in his office. The company announced his death yesterday. The source shared that in the afternoon, senior president of Lukoil, Oleg Pashayev, got worried that Robertus wasn't answering phone calls despite being in his office. There was no reaction to a knock at the door as well. Then Pashayev entered the office. He found a body of Robertus in the bathroom hanging. When the law enforcers arrived, employees told them that the atmosphere at Lukoil has been very stressful recently and the vice president was very nervous. Of course he's nervous. Bloomin' heck, he's operating in for a company who's getting targeted in a war, in a completely unfair and illegal war with Ukraine. His infrastructure is being targeted, and Putin is looming over him like some Death Eater. Anyway, talking about Russian kind of energy or manufacturing infrastructure, who really knows? Who really owns the Russian oligarchs, says VLP. I'm going to be talking to VLP soon about the UN and why Russia hasn't been kicked out of the UN or the Security Council there. So look forward to that one. I just need to sort out time and day. Never disregard Kremlin propaganda entirely. Sometimes it contains truths. So, Russia tomorrow. 3 Ural plants producing steel for the army have been nationalised. The owner of those plants, Yuri Antipov, a billionaire from the Forbes list, was detained in Chelyabinsk. The state in court took away from the owners, the Etalon, Lyudmila and Yuri Antipov companies, JSC Serov ferroalloy plant, JSC Chelyabinsk electrometallurgical plant, and JSC Kuznets ferroalloys. The trial was based on a claim by the Prosecutor General's office, which stated that Antipov illegally took possession of enterprises related to the military-industrial complex more than 30 years ago during privatisation, and after that, the factories allegedly came under the control of residents of, quote, unfriendly states, and their products were exported at a reduced cost to the USA and Europe. The company itself stated that the plants cannot be considered part of the military-industrial complex since it supplies ferroalloys to metallurgical enterprises and they already send steel to defence plants. The arrest of the Yuri Antipov is reported by 74.ru, citing sources in the company. So this is moving more to a war footing. This is an excuse. Yeah, it's completely fake, obviously. Well, I presume it is, that they're trumped up charges that allow Putin and the Kremlin to repossess private industries, to be able to use them to their own nationalised ends. such as the war effort there. Okay, Tim White says, let's now check in on the bastion of democracy. Early voting continues for Putin's, quote, re-election. You're absolutely free to vote for Putin. You're free to vote for Putin. No one else, just you're free to vote for Putin. This is occupied Severodonetsk. Look, a helpful election official is nearby to help home voters. A man with a gun. It's basically illegal in terms of, or not illegal, but that's not a free and fair election if that's taking place. It's just not. And then also you get to see who she's voting for. By all accounts, she's just completely ridiculous. Yeah, that's what freedom looks like in Russia. He thinks Russians like him as he continues to spread misinformation against Ukraine and helps to promote Putin, basically. That's Elon Musk. Elon Musk, again, as he does his mate David Sachs on a daily basis, is again just spouting pro-Russian narratives. Russia will keep making territorial gains in mostly Russian-speaking areas until they reach mostly Ukrainian-speaking areas, at which point local opposition will make further gains extremely difficult. This is just straight away just nonsense, as if, like, if you speak Russian, you are therefore pro-Russian, and you're not, can't be pro-Ukrainian. I mean, Kharkiv Oblast, Kharkiv City, such an idiot. This notion that Russia can arbitrarily steamroll any region, even with extreme local opposition, is demonstrably false, as they would otherwise have conquered all of Ukraine 2 years ago. Well, he's actually got something vaguely right there, but prefacing that with Russian talking points is just, it's just so irritating. So irritating. So-called Deputy Chairman of the Security Council, Medvedev, suggests his 7 points for the capitulation of Ukraine. Again, what do Russia want to do with Ukraine? Just listen to the Russians, including full compensation to Russia and admitting that all Ukrainian territory belongs to Russia. So this is what Medvedev, the Prime Minister of Russia, is saying. Recognition by the former, hereinafter referred to as Ukraine, of defeat in the military component of the conflict, complete and unconditional surrender of Ukraine, scare quotes Ukraine, represented by the neo-Nazi clique in Kiev, demilitarization of Ukraine, and the ban on the creation of paramilitary forces on its territories in the future. 2, recognition of the Nazi character by the international community of... So we have to admit that we have to recognize, this is a stipulation here, that Ukraine is Nazi. That's what is being demanded by Medvedev. By the international community of the former Kiev political regime, and a forced denazification of all government bodies of former Ukraine under UN control. 3, UN statement of loss of former Ukraine of international legal entity and the impossibility of any of its legal successors joining military alliances without the consent of Russia. 4, resignation of all constitutional authorities of former Ukraine and the immediate holding of elections to the provisional parliament of the self-governing territory of former Ukraine. 5, adoption by the provisional parliament of laws on the payment of all required compensation to Russia, including payments to the relatives of the dead citizens of our country and payments of harm to the health of the wounded, establishing a procedure for compensation for property damage caused by constituent entities of the Russian Federation. In other words, they're demanding that Ukraine pays for the dead and wounded Russian soldiers that Russia sent in to invade Ukraine. It's freaking disgusting. 6, official recognition by the interim parliament of former Ukraine that its entire territory is the territory of the Russian Federation, adoption of an act of reunification of territories of Ukraine with Russia, self-dissolution of the provisional parliament, UN recognition of the act of reunification. Now, I go back to people like Elon Musk and say, you do realise what they want, and you are advocating for Ukraine to go to the negotiating table to negotiate this. Right, okay, that's fine. Just asking for a friend. Russia spreads rumours about negotiations. Uncritical people write naive articles or post stuff on Twitter like Elon Musk. US cuts off aid to Ukraine. Putin says, thanks, with your help, I'll win the war and destroy Ukraine. Putin, quote, it would be ridiculous for us to start negotiating with Ukraine just because it's running out of ammunition. Yaroslav Trofimov adds, Republican leadership of the House cutting off military supplies to Ukraine has made Putin drop his pretense about desiring peace talks. He wants it all. They want it all. That's all you need to know. All you need to know. And a final thing, let's just dip into a review of a Lada Vesta. Now, this is a brand new car that Lada produced. And although there are loopholes to sanctions, there is some interesting stuff to note of this. The review is, it could be worse. F, look, it's a nice car. I don't care if there's no stereo. I'll install it myself. So there's no stereo. There are no speakers. Fine, I'll do it myself. I'll buy cheap ones. Why overpay for them? So no stereo, no speakers. Seat heating is also not necessary. I will not drive it in the winter. No airbags. I don't care. Look how cool it is. Oh man, it doesn't open. Mirror. What's the point of having a mirror? As he says here, I have it here, and that's it. I don't think there's a light, whatever. What's the point? Nothing to see at night. There's no third headrest straight, no parking sensors, no rear view camera. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. The point of this really is that, yes, at the end he says, it's so small, it's not a problem, it gives me a chance to see everything. So I think the point of this is, it's missing all the components that require microchips, I would have thought. There's all stereo, heated seats, speakers, so on and so forth. So I think that's significant if they are struggling to produce your basic products that require components that we thought that they're really struggling to get. Now, I presume they're not struggling to get them for some industries like the defense industries, and they're probably just getting all of these microchips and components and throwing them all at the defense industries. And when it comes to making cars for their domestic market, then you're just going to have to do without stereos and speakers and heating and whatnot. So I just thought that there's possibly quite a lot that you can learn from that. Interesting. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care. Speak soon.